Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 178 of the podcast. In this episode, I talk with my friend Alfred Burgess, and we talk all about reaching outsiders in your ministry. And what does that look like? How does that change things? Language, approach, culture, all of that. We do talk a little bit about multi-site ministry since that is Alfred's context, but that is not a big part of the conversation. And so you're going to love our conversation. I think all of our churches really need to think through the filter of what is this experience like for someone who's never been in church or certainly who hasn't been in church in a long time. Now, before we jump into that interview, we're going to remind you of a couple things we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. One is that there's a great solution now that you can get if you want to use digital signage in your church, in your ministry. If you want to take a TV and then turn it into digital signage in your lobby, at your check-in area, in your environments, maybe in your preschool rooms, things like that, just go to ministryboost.org/screens. It just takes an Amazon Fire Stick. It's an app that runs on that. And those are very affordable, maybe $50. Sometimes you can get them on sale for $35. And then it's $10 a month per screen for this service. And it can do a bunch of great things. So check that out at ministryboost.org/screens. And then we do still have those two other webinars coming up. One this week, if you're listening when this comes out, all about keeping kids safe online. And then the big one the following week, developing leaders, a pipeline and a plan for growing your ministry team. It's also the webinar where we're going to announce some big news for Ministry Boost, something new and exciting that we think is going to be really helpful as it relates to leadership development. I'm excited to talk about a few things on that webinar too, about churches that did leadership development and did these three things, experienced more success, more of reaching their goals and growth and health and all of that. If they did all three, they had to do all three things, which I thought was very interesting. We'll talk about that on the webinar and how you can do that in your ministry and in your church. So that is the following Wednesday, February 12th, 1 p.m. Eastern. So you can check out all that and more at ministryboost.org. Right now, that screens link that I mentioned isn't public. You can't find that if you click around. So you have to type in ministryboost.org/screens. But the webinars are right there on the homepage, or you can link at the menu up top. As usual, for this interview, you can get all the links and notes and all that at nickblevins.com/episode 178. So let's jump into my conversation with Alfred about reaching outsiders in NextGen ministry, as well as his multi-site context. Today I'm talking with my friend Alfred Burgess. Welcome to the podcast, Alfred.
Hey, great to be here, man.
So tell us about you and your family and your church as we get rolling.
Well, about me and my family. Let's see, a little short history. I grew up in the South. I grew up in Arkansas, of all places, and went to college in Virginia, met my wife, Maranatha. We've been married almost 24 years, and I have 3 kids. My oldest one is about to turn 16, which means he will start driving in about a month and a half.
Good times.
Yeah. There's a lot of, I'm not really an anxiety person, but there's a lot of anxiety behind that one.
Sure.
So his name is Bear. He's almost 16. The middle one is Brock. He is 14. He just turned 14. And then I have a little girl named Bowen, and she is 9. And that's the story of us. We live right outside of Phoenix, Arizona, in a suburb of Gilbert is where we live, and serve at Sun Valley Community Church there. I've been here for 2 years. I was in Atlanta for about 10 years before that, a church called Cross Point, and been out here, and I'm the executive pastor of our NextGen Ministries. So I oversee all of our kids and student ministries on all of our campuses.
So I want to talk about Sun Valley and kids and student ministry both, and what that looks like, and your multi-site, and just kind of the nuances of all that. So give us kind of an overview of what Sun Valley is like, how many campuses, maybe attendance, some stuff like that.
Little history. Sun Valley started in 1990. Some guys from California came to the suburbs of Phoenix, 2 families to start it, kind of multitude of meeting in schools, movie theaters, all that kind of stuff. Finally bought, I think, 9 acres. 9 acres, built the church, actually, the people of the church built the original like worship center, kids space, all of that. And then it grew over the course of a number of years. It grew to church of probably about 2,000, 2,500, somewhere in there. And doing that on 9 acres means there's not very much parking.
Mm-hmm.
So Saturday services, Sunday services, and we kind of just outgrew. It was a lid for us. And then got to the point where we were looking at multi-site and expanding. Actually, Jim Tomberlin, in his book called Better Together, it's about church mergers. Our church is actually in there because we went through a merger with Bethany, a Christian church. We merged with them. Bethany is now our Tempe campus, and merged with them, and that kind of started us down the path of multi-site. We've done 2 different mergers. We kind of did a church plant on a screen in a place called Casa Grande, which is about 45 minutes south of us. And we planted, I shouldn't say planted, we birthed a true multi-site at our Queen Creek campus, which I live the nearest to it. So we have a total of 5 campuses in our original Gilbert location. So we've been multi-site for probably about 8 years now. And through that 8 years, we have kind of average attendance as probably somewhere around 8,000 to 9,000 on a weekend. And kids ministry at all those campuses. We're not really an autonomous multi-site. We're pretty much like a franchise model of multi-site where it's a pastor on a screen. The worship is all the same. Our programming is identical. Facilities may be a little different and kind of contextualized for those different facilities, but it's the same kids theming, same programmatic things at every one of our campuses, and that also for student ministry.
Yeah, and I would love to hear a little bit about, I was saying before we recorded how children's ministries across churches look fairly similar. Now, that's not always true. There's different models, like a class model versus small groups and large group and all that. Student ministry tends to get more diverse, but tell us just a little bit about what kids ministry looks like at Sun Valley.
So under the umbrella of kids ministry at Sun Valley, we have our preschool kind of segment of that, which is birth through our 4s and 5s. And then we have K-3 ministry, kindergarten through 3rd grade. And then we have 4, 5, 6, which is our 4th, 5th, and 6th grade ministry. And those are very similar ministries where at the campuses where we can do it, you walk in and there is an individual classroom because the facility allows for it for each one of those kind of age groups or age segmented. And then they stay in there for a little while. Then they transition to large group, worship, video. Right now we're using 252 through Orange for our curriculum. So we take that, we kind of edit it a little bit with some of the language that fits our particular church and the context here better. It is the Southwest, kind of a West Coast vibe. So few terminology things have to be adjusted with that. And then they're in large group for a little while, and then they go back to small groups, and parents pick them back up in small groups. So it's a small group, large group, small group model. And in our campuses where their kids' environment, say their K-3 room is just one large room, then we have kind of circle rugs and some portable walls where we divide that and give them some small group space to actually come in and have that same model where they kind of check into their small groups, then they go to large group and then back to small groups.
Gotcha. How many campuses, by the way, are portable versus permanent?
All of ours are permanent.
Okay.
So we had one that was portable, which was our Casa Grande campus, set up, tear down in a school, and man, that's all I have to say about that. So all of them are in permanent facilities. We have a 6 campus that we start construction in January on it. It'll be a permanent facility. And one of our campuses, our East Mesa campus, we're actually starting in January also just redoing their facility because they have the smallest kid space, and it's a campus that runs about 1,000. and they have kid space like for maybe 50 or 60 kids. It's tight. So we're redoing that entire campus, a little larger footprint out there.
Cool. Now tell us about student ministry, where I know this can look different across churches anyway, when they meet, how they meet. Is it small groups with large group? Is it separate, that whole thing? And then, of course, in a multi-site model, there are differences there too. So what does student ministry look like at Sun Valley?
Man, that is a great question, and it has about 50 answers. To that, if anyone can do student ministry multi-site really well, they are a genius in my book, because it is a tough nut to crack. And here, particularly at Sun Valley, we've tried multiple things, and some things have gone really well. Some things have not gone well at all. We made a programmatic change about 3.5 years ago, brought in a well-known communicator about intergenerational worship, decided to make a kind of philosophical change with student ministry, took programming off of the weekend services, put it on Sunday night for high school, Wednesday night for junior high, and we thought that it would go really well. It didn't go well. And then we made some transition of going, okay, what if we just had one night with everybody all together? Because out here, we don't have middle school and high school. We have junior high and high school. So we don't have 6th, 7th, and 8th grade together. We only have 7th and 8th grade. So 7th and 8th grade, 9th through 12th, we're like, hey, what if we put those together, try to create some synergy, do something just on Sunday nights? That did not go well at all either. So we're like, okay, we want to make it convenient for our parents. So what if we move junior high back to the weekend services where we can because of space at the campuses? So we did that, and we've seen that work out okay. And then Sunday nights, we're making another programmatic change for students this coming January, where their Sunday night program will be more fun. They can bring their friends to it, that kind of stuff. But we're going to move to in-home small groups throughout the week, and try to build some synergy around that with relationships in homes. And we're trying to figure out student ministry. We don't have it nailed. We're still trying to figure out and find out what actually will create results, create relationships in students' lives, and actually see them come to church.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about like what didn't go well. I mean, was it just attendance? And then what is going, since some of the other changes have been made, what are you seeing there?
It wasn't just attendance. There was some staffing turnover in the midst of that. There was also volunteer turnover, which was crucial to the success or failure of that. With our volunteers, honestly, we thought that it would be great, thought that we communicated it great, the vision for it, direction, philosophy behind it. But at the end of the day, it's like, hey, we're here on the weekends. We'll come to service. We'll sit one, serve one kind of model. We'll do that and give that to you all day long. But we're not going to come on Sunday night. It's a big family night out here for a lot of people. And with events, activities, things like that for a big program for junior high on Wednesdays, it just wasn't convenient for people. And it wasn't that they were anti what we were doing. It's just that they voted with their feet and they didn't come, and students didn't come. They're like, nah, I'm not really interested in doing that. And we're like, this is a great program. We're spending, a large amount of finances on it, expending a huge amount of energy and recruiting, and it just didn't work. And we're like, okay, are we trying to push a rock uphill? That really, why don't we lean into the convenience of while our families are actually here on our campus? Because they do come on the weekend, Saturdays and Sunday.
How has that gone with some of the changes back?
The changes back, you see a boost of attendance. We've regained some of the volunteers, and they used to have in-home groups a number of years ago. Some of those leaders, even from a number of years ago, have come back around and said, hey, I'd really like to do that again. So we've seen the volunteers start to turn back around. Now we're waiting on the students in turn to turn around and also attend.
Yeah. Yeah. That's hard. That's one of the things about student ministry. Like, we do the model you were moving to, and that's what's worked for us. Students are in the service on Sundays, and middle school and high school both meet on Sunday nights. Their large group, small group both happen on Sunday nights. But one of the things I've observed with student ministry is the change is the hardest part. It's almost like if you can get something consistent over years, you almost don't want to mess with it, because the chance that you'll change it and build that new momentum is low, even if it is seemingly a better option. Now, I'm always for, like, I like our model because I do like having students in service. I like them being able to serve during a service, attend one, like all that stuff is great. But there is something to it about the history with student ministry. Like some for some ministries, it's Wednesday night, and it's like it's hard to change nights when it's been in there for years.
I think there's a key word is it's credibility. You look at even our kids programming, that's not really changed to a large degree, but our student programming has changed a lot over the years. And it's just credibility that parents can count on something. And for us, we're like, man, we're always changing this, and we're changing it to get the best results. But really, have we lost some credibility with our parents?
Yeah. So how do you feel about where it is now? I mean, I know you're still in the midst of it. You say you're waiting for students to catch up. You got more changes coming. What does it feel like now?
It feels like we're kind of going back to what it used to be, kind of quote unquote. And for our parents and long-term families here, they're like, oh, great, thank you. And then for some of our staff, we've brought back some staff that used to be here a number of years ago. And it's like, oh, there's this feeling, I don't want to say nostalgia, because it's not really that, but it's just this comfort level of, oh, okay, we're kind of going back to the way things were, and we liked the way things were. So thank you for doing that. So we've that's kind of the feeling among the majority of our volunteers and parents. Now we just need to see how that plays out, especially in January with that small group change in homes.
Yeah. Yeah, that'll be interesting, because a lot of times, I mean, certainly some people are going to like what used to be, and it is different with student ministry. But you know how it is. A lot of times, if you're going back to what used to be in church, that's not good. Sometimes because it's like an old model, but this is still a model it's still a current model of student ministry. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes.
And we're not that type of church that you're like, oh, go back to the way things used to be. Oh, the good old days. That's not in our vocabulary here. And we're like, well, we tried some new things and it didn't work as well as what we were doing. So let's go back to what we were doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like there's, I don't know, there's probably 4 or 5 typical models of student ministry, and you just kind of highlighted 2 different ones, and you did one, you tried another one. Now you're going back to that one. And hopefully this will work again. Right. And help that stick. That'd be interesting. I'd love to hear more about that. When I see you again, we'll probably be able to talk about how it's going, although it'll be probably early. So I want to talk a little bit too about kind of behind the scenes, especially since you're in a multi-site church, and that just brings some uniqueness. What is staffing like structure-wise? You lead NextGen. You're the multi-site NextGen pastor, which I would think is more of a central type of role. But if you have any campus responsibility, tell us about that. But how is staffing structured in NextGen?
Staffing structure for NextGen. There is myself, which oversee all kids and students from a central standpoint, as far as direction, vision, philosophy, resourcing, all of that. On the team that I have, the central team, there is a guy named Mike, and Mike oversees kind of our student ministry arm. So he's what we call the student ministries pastor. And with him, there's a student pastor on each campus, and then depending on the campus size, there's also a junior high pastor on that campus. And if a campus is large enough, they also have like a student ministry admin on their team. For our kids central team, there's like an admin that I have, and then for kids, we have 2 people centrally. One of them is Nicole. She does all of our curriculum. So everything from preschool curriculum, K3, 4, 5, 6, she takes it, edits it, does all the supplies for it. There's a bin that's ready at the 15th of the month for the next month for all the curriculum, all the supplies to be picked up for each one of those 3 ministry areas. She's phenomenal. So she does that, has a system worked out. And then the lady that works alongside of her, her name is Kim. Kim actually came from our weekend team doing graphics, Pro Presenter, all of that. And she helps Nicole load up all of the digital content. We do some interesting things like with the God Time card and the parent cue card. We actually don't print those and hand them out. Our system that we have, our database system, actually texts parents whenever they pick up their child. An hour after that, it texts them, and in that text, it has either the parent cue card or the God Time card for them to actually have in a digital format instead of handing out a physical copy. And then she uploads all the videos, all of our large group content, worship content. She handles all of that. So that's our central team. And then our campus team, there's a kids director on each one of the campuses. And that kids director, depending on the size of the campus, our smallest campus runs about 400. That position is combined with the student director. They have one full-time person down there because our staffing ratios are 1 to 125. So one full-time equivalent to 125 people or 125 kids. So at the smallest campus, it's the NextGen director down there, and they oversee kids and students. There's about 100 kids and about 25 or 30 students. At our largest campus, which we would like this model to be at every campus, depending on the size, there's a preschool coordinator. And preschool coordinator, depending on the size of campus, full-time or part-time. They also do kind of our midweek childcare. They take care of that. But they're the preschool coordinator. There's a K3 coordinator, and that's responsible for all of large group and small group, building a team. And then there's a 4, 5, 6 coordinator. So depending on the size campus that we're at, sometimes those are part-time positions. Sometimes those are full-time positions. And then some campuses have like a special needs coordinator and some other small, like large group coordinators, depending on their size. Like the largest campus has a couple of those. Mm-hmm. So that's our structure. It's very scalable, and it's not a completely different structure at each campus. It's a very similar structure, and it is definitely dependent upon the size campus that you're at.
Now, 2 questions real quick. One, I know you all have really good ratios that you use, and so I'll probably even ask more about that, but you're saying it's 1 to 125. That's true for kids and students. So you use the same number for both ministries.
Students is actually a little lower than that. For kids, it okay. is 1 to 125. Kind of overall, if you look at overall church on a campus, that ratio is 1 to 125. But when you look at students, it's a little less than that. It's about 1 to 75, 1 to 80 is usually the ratio that we use for students.
That makes sense. That's what I was going to ask, and that's typical. I mean, if you watch how churches staff and all that makes. I mean, it just makes sense. And then the other question, just to clarify, and if people are listening that don't live in the multi-site church, my church isn't multi-site, but a big thing is, how does like leadership and all that work? Are your campus kids and student staff, do they report primarily to their campus pastor, and then it's like what they call a dotted line to you, solid line to the campus pastor, or vice versa? How does that work?
It's funny because no one understands solid line, dotted line at all.
Even at your church, even on staff?
Oh yeah. It's one of those. This is probably the most clarifying statement. If it is a student ministry or a children's ministry decision, when it comes to resourcing, when it comes to philosophy, when it comes to the how-to of those ministry areas, then the decision-making lies within our NextGen team centrally. If it's something that affects the campus, where are you having this meeting? If it's your vacation, your time off, if it's your reconciling of credit card, or even kind of your budget finances wise, then with that, we let the campus handle that, and the campus pastor is their supervisor when it comes to campus related things and how they operate within that campus team. So
Gotcha.
it's one of those, if it's a student ministry or kids ministry decision, then it comes centrally. If it's a campus decision when it relates to anything specifically on that campus, then we let the campus handle all of that instead of us getting tied up in that centrally. But it's not like you can take a kid's room and go paint it different colors and put up different theming. We have design standards that are across all campuses. Our print items, the material that we use, the resources, all of those look the same across all the campuses. Our trainings are the same, materials the same, all of that.
Yeah, and you have, like you said earlier, you have a franchise model, so it makes sense that you have more of a voice in what kids and student ministry looks like at the campus level.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me ask it this way. At the end of a year, like if somebody gets a review or whatever, who does it? Both?
Both.
Okay.
Both. Yeah. Just like we're going into review season now, just like last year, like I will sit in the same room with the campus pastors. We use a system called develop.me for our goals through all that. We're kind of changing that to modify it to fit our context a little better. But we take that. There's monthly one-on-ones with both campus pastor and myself, or campus pastor and the student ministries pastor, Mike. And then we both sit in the same room and do the reviews together. Yeah. So everyone's on the same page. It's not a us versus them. It's we're all in this together.
Yeah, which makes sense. So how does, in terms of how you lead it, because a lot of churches have, if they're multi-site, they have a lot of what you're talking about with how it works, right? But not a lot of churches have multi-site with a NextGen pastor, right? Because, a lot of churches, that's a growing role that a lot of churches are putting in place, somebody that oversees, nursery through high school or maybe even college. But it's not, as it's not like it's super popular. And then you've got multi-site, which is also growing, but it's not the majority. So you put the two together, there's not many of those. So I'd like to hear about how you lead that. What does it look like in terms of meetings, weekly? How does Central, you manage that, but also help at the campus level? Give us a window into how that works month to month.
All right. Well, I'll also give you some pitfalls in this, or some things that are like, oh, that is one area that not just me, but pretty much any multi-site needs to improve on. Our meeting rhythm, we have, I'll give you the weekly, then the monthly rhythm. On a week basis, we have a Zoom call because we're spread out kind of all over the East Valley of Phoenix here. So we have a Zoom call once a week, like with the preschool coordinators. They have a Zoom call once a week with the K3 coordinators. It's for 30 minutes. It's just a touch base, anything big coming up. Let's make sure we're stacking hands, we're on the same page. Look forward to next month. Is there anything that we need to do particularly for our campuses? So we do that with each different age group. And then we do that with the kids directors, which is an hour-long Zoom call, kids directors and student directors. So I do the kids one. Mike, student ministry pastor, does the student one. So then they, on their team, they have a weekly meeting on their campus with their team. And that meeting sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes it's an hour, depending on, at one campus, it's just one guy, so he's meeting with himself. So that's kind of the track of what a week looks like. And then once a month, we do an all staff meeting with all of our staff from all of our campuses, get together, usually bring somebody in for that. After that gets over, we eat lunch. After that's over, our entire NextGen team meets together, students and kids alike. And I usually lead that particular meeting. And then there's different one-on-ones throughout the month with kids directors with me, with student directors with Mike. So that's our rhythm. It's not a ton of meetings, but we try to really rely on Zoom whenever we can. And because we don't want people driving 45 minutes, 30 minutes, 20 minutes just to come to a meeting for an hour. Let's just do Zoom, and that's a lot more productive doing that.
Sure.
Here's
Yeah.
the pitfall that we're just now navigating. We meet with kids directors, meet with student directors. Well, there's three types of communication within a multi-site. There's communication coming down, and that would be like us communicating down to kids and student directors, and really communicating that to the people, honestly, that report to us. Well, there's communication across, which is communication across the organization when it comes to student directors, or communication across when it comes to campus pastors. And then there's communication up from the kids and student director really to their campus pastor. And what we've kind of discovered through this process is there hadn't been a lot of up communication from the kids and student team to their campus pastors. So we're trying to be intentional on the central side to communicate down to the campus pastor team in there. So that's probably a pitfall that we've realized is we've left out the campus pastor communication from our central NextGen team. And we're trying to do a better job of rectifying that to make sure campus pastors know how we're leading and what we're leading our student pastors and our kids pastors through. So that's a huge part that we're leaning into right now is our communication with campus pastors.
Yeah, that makes sense because they have to know what's going on. And you could, I mean, it could be they know what's going on because you are communicating it down to them, the campus pastors, or if your campus staff were, doing something, they could receive it and then go, like you're saying, communicate up to their campus pastor. But if neither one's doing it, then those campus pastors are just in the dark, right?
Oh, they are. And from their standpoint, disclosure is always better than discovery. So it would be better it would be better for us to communicate that and disclose what we're doing to them instead of them discovering kind of, or they're in a conversation with their kids pastor and they're like, hey, we're doing this next week. And they're like, what are you talking about? I don't know about it. So we're trying to build extreme trust with them by doing our job in disclosing and communicating down to them.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I'd love to kind of shift gears here at the end and kind of talk about the context a little bit. I mean, like you said, you spent 10 years in Atlanta. And one thing we were talking about before we recorded is just how different it is there in Arizona. And a lot of people aren't churched like you experienced in Georgia. It's just, maybe they've never been or they haven't been in a long time. And so there's just lots of things that are different. So you tell us, what is it? What is different? What is it like to reach these people that are outside the church and really don't have that connection versus maybe what it was like when, seems like everybody knows what it's like to be a part of a church or was or recently, maybe even.
Yeah, I've served a number of years in churches in the South, church in Texas, and there's this built-in church culture just because of what it is. So I had a friend say, well, there's really good church memory of, oh, well, I know my grandmother went to a church or I've been to a church for this or I got invited to this. Out here, there is a very short church memory. And by meaning, whenever you say things, here's an easy one for you. We don't say, or we don't really use the phrase salvation or saved. We use the phrase saying yes to Jesus because people don't understand that have no church background or context, really the words that we're using. So I've had to change my terminology, and our church in general is a great job. And our pastor, our exec team, they do a great job of communicating with people that have no church background and they're outsiders. And that kind of plays into a lot of our ministry decisions. One of the things that we say around here is be clear, not cute. And it's the first time I heard that, I was like, what are you talking about? And I'm a big, man, let's call this ministry by this name and call it this. And what about instead of, by the way, the preteen ministry here, 456, used to be called Merge. And I was like, Merge, wait, that's what it was called at my old church. That's a great name. No, it's not clear to outsiders. 4, 5, 6 is like, oh, that's clear. So the things that we do, students is clear, not a student ministry name. So all of our ministries here, you're like, okay, it's not that creative and it's not that cute. Yeah, but it's very clear, and it's clear to people that are walking into church for the first time and families that are walking in for the first time that don't know about our cuteness, but they know and understand clarity. Another thing that we say is likable, not lovable. And hey, whoever's standing on the platform, whoever's standing up in front of people, leading people in a classroom, greeting people, they need to be likable. And I know that's probably such an understatement that they need to be likable. But I've also been at churches, pretty conservative churches in the South, where, they not necessarily hellfire and brimstone, but the person who's standing on the platform is not likable. Your teachers and your leaders that you have in your classrooms, they're not likable. Now, they've been serving for 40 years and you love them to death because they have a heart for your kids. But at the end of the day, they're just not likable. And think about that. It's like honoring them, but you don't have to put them as the face of your ministry. Another one that we sometimes say is simple, not simplistic, is we try to create systems that are very clear, that are really simple, they're intuitive, whether that's to get in a group. It's like, hey, we want you to get in a group. We don't have these big campaigns, or it's like, get in a group so that you can grow in your friendship with others in Jesus that is centered around God's word. It's simple. It's not complicated. Hey, we want you to join a team here. We want you to volunteer. Understand, we want you on a winning team. Come join a team. And even, hey, how to give financially to the church. Here's what your finances go towards. And being very, very clear. We often talk about an iPhone. An iPhone is really simple. It's really intuitive to use, but it's not simplistic. There is a complex system behind the simple interface. Well, we want the simple interface out there for people to use. There may be some behind the scene things that we have to do that are a little more complicated to make the simple forward facing language and system work, but we want to make it easy for people. And so often in church, we make it difficult for people to become a part of a church or to be involved in the church or even to take their next step in what we want them to do. So we try to make it clear. Our groups, for one thing that we do, we kind of have seasons for groups, and they run for about 6 weeks. And a lot of times they're on campus. Sometimes we do them in homes. And it's like, hey, just come be a part of this for 6 weeks. It's easy on, easy off, centered around the sermon. We just want you to grow in your friendship and relationship with others. So those are some things whenever we look at our programs of church, whenever we look at our terminology that we use, are we really focused on who comes here week in and week out, or are we focused on those that we've been called to go and reach and compel them to come into the house of the Lord? So
yeah, that's
a little outsider focus there.
Are there any ways that you think about how this shows up in kids and student ministry? Like, I know our pastor's very good at the things you're saying, not make the way he'll talk about it is don't make any assumptions, so like this week, for instance, we were running through an interview of a story that we're going to do on stage. And the story is actually one of our staff people who is someone who was not a part of any church ever, and then found her way to Jesus through our church and eventually came on staff. So, I mean, if there's anybody that should know, not making assumptions, it's her. But what happens is, you just do because you've been around it for a long time. Mm-hmm. And so even in the story, he was really good about saying, don't just talk about Ezekiel, the Bible, book without saying that, because people aren't going to know what that is. Is that a person named Ezekiel? Don't reference this other person on staff because, yes, some people know who that is, but some people won't. So you can reference him, but again, you got to say something. Some of you may know her, she's on staff. Some of you may know her. So just a lot of that context stuff is it really, a lot of it is language, which is like what you're talking about. But are there any ways that it has shown up in kids or student ministry that you can think of?
One is don't assume parents know what the kids are being taught or communicated to. And with that, and don't assume that the kids, even though they may show up almost every week, don't assume that they understand what's going on, because the likelihood is there's probably not much happening in the house to reinforce what you're talking about. So this may be the only thing that they get from week to week, or in our case, every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks. Is you kind of have to back up. We do, 252, so it's a month theme. It's kind of that month theme. Don't just pick up from where you're at. Actually go back and explain the couple of weeks that they may have missed and those kids have missed, and just the review in there to go, hey, these may be, as we call them, or some people would call them, church kids that actually show up every week, but they may not have the understanding and the knowledge of where you just pick up from. It's almost go back, review, and bring them to that place, and do the same thing with the leaders. Don't assume that your leaders are there also. And then the conversation that you have with the parents, we make so many assumptions that, well, parents know what's going on in school with them. They know what's going on in their kids' lives. The reality is most of them don't. So don't assume that they know what's going on at church, and communicate clearly and easily to them so they can be like, oh, and the biggest thing that we say, don't beat around the bush when you're asking parents or volunteer something. Just be straight with it, because people are really smart, and we're reaching people that aren't churchy. They're not used to people beating around the bush and going, hey, I'm asking you to do this, but I know you're busy. You really don't have time, but could you just be clear, ask boldly in that.
Yeah, that's good. Any other thoughts? Any last thoughts about reaching outsiders versus insiders or any of that?
A big one would be, I think probably the last thing I would say is, when you look at our kids and student ministry, students show up because their friends are there. As non-spiritual as that sounds, it's pretty spiritual.
Totally,
they show up.
Yeah, true.
That's why they show up. Kids show up because it's fun. And fun and friends. Those are the two things, and those are pretty big values. And guess what? You can have all of the great plans in the world, but if it's not enjoyable, if it's not fun, and their friends aren't coming, the likelihood is it's probably not going to grow and reach people that need Jesus.
Yeah, and fun and friends are two things that doesn't matter if you're insider or outsider, you both like. You know what I mean? Whether you grew up in the church or not. Like, I grew up in the church. I certainly liked fun, and friends matter. Actually, I mean, that's part of my story. I didn't really go to our Sunday night student stuff until I was almost in high school. And part of it was I didn't have the friends that were going. Like, my friends only went on Sunday morning like I did, and then eventually made friends and got invited to Sunday night and went, and it was fun. In fact, for me, I mean, I don't know about you, but our children's and student ministry then are not like what we do in churches now. So, or even like, or anything like in the service, I guess, just to say what service is like now is not what it was like then. So student ministry was like a whole other world. It's like, this is actually awesome, compared to Sunday mornings or whatever. So, and obviously that's not all you do, but you're right. That's a good, you need that to reach them. And then you can teach them all the things of the Bible and make connections and all that.
Yeah. I almost feel like the uphill in the snow, both ways kind of conversation.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, you realize I didn't go to church at all. Never knew Jesus. Walked in church when I'm 16, and it was fun, and I knew people there. And it was, you talk about difference in student ministry. Like, this student ministry, they had like a drama team. They had a gymnastics team. And I was like, gymnastics, that sounds cool. And I'm not a small guy. And I'm like, hey, gymnastics, that sounds awesome. So I joined the gymnastics team at church. And I was like, what? where did that come from? When did we think, man, this is how we're going to reach students? Gymnastics. There you go.
I need a picture or a video, Alfred, of you doing gymnastics. That would be, man.
There is one picture, and it is under lock and key. So
that's probably smart. Awesome. Well, man, I'm glad you're out there at Sun Valley a couple of years in, like you said, and things seem to be going really well, and the church is doing great things. And so thanks for taking time and coming on the podcast to share with us what it looks like there behind the scenes and how, this different context is working with reaching outsiders. How can people connect with you if they have any questions?
You can email me, which is probably the easiest way. Alfred at alfredburgess.com, which is really simple. Our church website, sunvalleycc.com, and just connect with me those ways, or on Instagram at youthguy, UTHGUY, and just send me a message and I'll connect with you, and anything that we can do, and anything that we have learned here with Multisite and kids and students, any resources that we have, we will give those to you and really just help us along the way, because no one has this Multisite thing completely figured out. So we're all on this journey together, and I would love to show you what we've learned along the journey, but also learn what you're doing and see if we could do that better. So Nick, I appreciate you taking time and enjoyed being on today.
Yep. Thanks for doing it.
All right. See you, man.
Well, it's always fun to talk with friends on the podcast, and a few of the action items I thought of coming out of my conversation with Alfred were, one, to establish trust in your youth ministry. That is so important, and oftentimes it's one of the last things we think about. It's not very tangible or practical. It's not on the to-do list for this week. So make a list of ideas of ways that you can build trust in your youth ministry with parents, and act on some of those things this week. And then the second action step, and this was a lot of our conversation, and I love this, is to ask the question, what isn't outsider friendly? What language do you use? What expectations do you have? What assumptions do you make as a church and as a ministry about people that wouldn't make sense if they were an outsider, if they were new, if they were invited and they were a neighbor of somebody, hadn't been to church ever in their life? What do you say or do or expect that wouldn't make sense to them? And you may realize there's a lot. There might be a lot. In fact, it'd be great to even get in a secret shopper, find somebody who isn't a church person and get them to come and pay them and offer them lunch, or pay them to come and evaluate and, just tell you what they saw through their eyes, the way that you can't and I can't see it anymore. Now, if you are multi-site, I think the third action step is to define those decision rights. Like we talked about, what are the campus level decisions? What are the central decisions? Like, who is making what decisions and why? Who has the authority where? It's always going to be messy in multi-site. There will always be some conversations and some oversteps and all of that. But defining decision rights and who ultimately decides what for at least the big pieces within every ministry can be really, really, really helpful for maintaining a healthy culture in a multi-site context. So hope you enjoyed that interview. Like I said in the beginning, check out ministryboost.org/screens for digital signage with your TVs. Great solution for just $10 a month per TV. And also check out ministryboost.org for the webinars. The one this week about keeping kids safe online. The big one next week about developing leaders, a pipeline, and a plan for growing your ministry team. We're excited about all that and what's to come that we'll announce on that webinar. So get all the links and everything that we talked about at nickblevins.com/episode 178. And that will do it for this week. I hope it was helpful. Hope you subscribe so you never miss an episode, but we'll catch you next time on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.